say something.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Cool. Thank you. Actually, if we're going to stand right next to each other, I'll turn mine off. Thanks, Tom. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Actually, give it 1 second. Timed it perfectly.
Yeah, there we go.
No worries, no worries. Thanks everyone for being here. I think we got almost all new faces. Has anyone been at the Python one before? Did you? One? Okay, right on.
All right.
Cool, well thanks everyone. Tonight we got Reese Hodge up here. Reese is AWS certified, remind me what it is?
Solutions Architect.
Solutions
Associate.
Architect Associate.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about all things hosting. Originally our plan was to kind of talk about all of the things hosting, like how to host every sort of Python thing conceivable and all the different cloud platforms. And then we realized that was a little bit of a lot to chew off in one meetup, so this will probably end up being 2 meetups. But tonight we're going to talk about hosting static generated websites in 2, maybe 3 if we have time, different cloud providers. As I mentioned, Reese is AWS certified, so he's going to talk about AWS. I technically have an Azure certificate, it's like fundamentals, so not really anything. But I will talk a little bit about hosting Python static sites on Azure. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about using GitHub Pages. And that'll probably take up the full time. So you guys can see that? Awesome. Is this blocking anyone? Can we all see it?
A little bit.
Oh, perfect. See behind the curtain. There's just a man back there orchestrating the whole thing. Yeah. So the static site generator, you've probably used maybe like a Node-based one or a JavaScript-based one before, but we're going to use a pretty popular Python one called MKDocs or Markdocs or MKDocs. There's like a few different ways to pronounce it. I usually call it Markdocs. It's basically a pretty simple tool that just generates a static site, static HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we're going to show up using that with AWS and Azure, and then maybe GitHub Pages, we'll see. So like I mentioned, Markdocs, static site generator, you write your templates or your website pages in Markdown, which is, I'm sure most of you have probably seen, if not used it before.
The interesting thing is you don't actually write Python.
Yeah, I don't actually, in our repo for this project, I don't know if there's actually a single Python file. It's all like YAML configurations, like Markdown, and then that's most of it, honestly. But it is a Python talk, and it's a Python framework. So it's used by pretty popular Python libraries, including FastAPI, Pydantic, SQL Model. Those are all actually made by the same guy, so it's probably not a great example. The Spokane Python website is also made using it, SpokanePython.com. If you haven't been there before, check it out. And we're going to be using our new friend, Stan the Snake. Stan the Snake was introduced in a talk I did for PyCascades last month, which is a Pacific Northwest Python conference. It was all online because of COVID. And I used Stan in some of our examples, and there ended up being a lot of love for Stan, and so he's stayed with us as our new meetup mascot. And
I saw that on the bottom of your image at the last minute. I was like, is that some kind of Easter egg?
You were like, what is this like green golf club looking thing? Yeah.
We were going to get T-shirts, but we didn't have time.
Next time, I just went with this. So here's an example of a super basic Markdown site. So this is written using, or a Markdocs site. This is written using Markdown and then an extension called Markdoc Material, which kind of uses material design to stylize it a little bit. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Reese, talk about some AWS stuff, and I'll be in the back watching the YouTube.
All right, thanks, Joe. All right. Yeah, so the first example we're going to provide for the hosting. So like Joseph mentioned, Stan has been learning to code Python, and he's getting pretty good at it. And he's got some code out there to show off his fancy website, but nobody can see it. So he has an idea that maybe I could go to Seattle, because there's places, there's tech companies there that maybe they can teach him how to host his website. So while he's there, he runs across Amazon, and he talks to an Amazon woman, and she says, "Hey, I got the perfect thing for you, Stan. You can put your code into an S3 bucket and turn it into a static website." And so now Stan's happy. So anyways, enough about Stan, I guess. So I created this sort of basic diagram of sort of what we're going to show you here. So we have some, as Joseph mentioned, some mkdocs Python generating code that's in a GitHub repo, and we're going to use the GitHub Actions workflow to deploy that to both AWS and Azure. You'll see that later. And so kind of what this diagram is just like a sort of a high level of the steps. On the left you have the repository. That's where you develop and commit your Python code. And then after the workflow is set up, I'll walk through the code for that later. Once that is committed, it'll kick off the workflow, and that'll go and deploy the code it builds the code first, and then actually deploys the Python code to an S3 bucket, which is enabled to become a static website. So a couple of things going on here. So there's sort of two kind of main ways you can deploy from GitHub to a cloud provider. You need to have some kind of secrets typically. That's sort of the old way, where you use a user password kind of concept. With AWS, it's access keys and a secret key, I think it's what it's called. But I'm not going to show that. We're actually going to use what they call an identity provider to deploy via a role. And so there isn't any secrets at all. You don't have to store any. The only thing you have to really store is just the name of the bucket, the S3 bucket, and then what role that the GitHub token service is going to use to try to impersonate or to be able to allowed to access the S3 bucket. So there's a little bit of setup that I'll show you. It's actually simpler than it might seem. But yeah, so the basic workflow will have on the bottom sort of middle with that blue icon is a request to upload to S3, and the example we're using here is just using the S3 sync command. And so basically it just does a diff between the bucket and the code, and then either uploads all the code in the first try, or just does a difference on it. And then so on the right-hand side, you see the cloud part of it, where the GitHub service actually talks to the S3 service, which does the identity, the role impersonation, and that's where you attach your permissions to be able to allow the GitHub repository to write to the bucket, but nobody, the public people can only read from it. So you'll see that here in a little bit. And so at the end of the end of the day, you have a S3 bucket with some objects in there that are basically the code. And so this is sort of a kind of a breakdown of the security that's flow that's happening. So step number one, you have the cloud provider. In this case, it's AWS. It sends off a OpenID connect trust or a request for a token, basically. And it gives it the role that it's going to assume. And then the cloud provider responds with a JSON web token that has the permission set there to allow the S3 sync command to go ahead and upload the objects into the bucket. Okay, so this is the part where hopefully everything goes right, because I'm just going to start coding stuff. Before I get into the AWS side of it, there's sort of some, yeah, you can see that. There's some basic steps here. And this repository is public too, and you guys can go and look at it yourself and use this as an example if you wanted. But yeah, so basically sort of the steps are, create an S3 bucket, enable it to be a static hosting, or to allow static hosting, which is pretty much just a checkbox, and then setting up either a user or a role in this case. And so, as you can see, I kind of mentioned this is sort of the old school way. I guess it's not really old school, but yeah, the older way versus using the identity provider and configuring the OpenID Connect so that the two services can talk to each other without anybody having to type passwords and usernames and stuff like that. Excuse me. Okay, and if anybody has any questions or comments, just go ahead and just fire it out because it's kind of informal, I guess. Right, so one of the main things that I've already done is create, and so on the AWS side, you have to create an identity provider. They have some that are sort of pre-configured for Google and some other providers, that well-known providers. But in this case, they didn't have one for the GitHub, so I created one as a custom. So I'll go over to the AWS side, and so
You created your own OIDC client for GitHub?
No, it's an identity provider that you set up. Yeah. So here, you can see this is the IAM dashboard. So over on the left-hand side over here, they have this list of identity providers, and so you can come in here and add one. And when you do that, it lets you choose a bunch of different options. I've already created it, but I'll just kind of show you. So you can either choose SAML or, in this case, OpenID Connect. And so when you do that, then you give it the provider URL and the audience, and that comes from the GitHub service. GitHub provides that information, which I think I have. One sec, let me fire up some code here. I think I have an example here of what that looks like. Let's see. Oh, wait, not that. Might take me a second to find it. Here it is. Oh, it opened up a new version. That's okay. This is the sort of the URLs I was talking about. So GitHub provides what they call an audience, and so what we're looking at here, right here, is hopefully you guys can see that, is a role, a piece of JSON that describes the conditions and the role for accessing through federation, accessing the token service from GitHub to Amazon. And so, kind of the key things are GitHub has a token server, Amazon has a secure token service, and then you also give it a condition that allows you to say, hey, I only want to allow permissions or the role to be able to do stuff if the code base is coming from this repository and this branch even. So you can give it different branches if you wanted. And so you could imagine, excuse me, you can imagine where you had different environments, like maybe you got test and production or QA or whatever you got, whatever you wanted to call it. So that leads me back to this here. So let me cancel this. So I've already gone and set that up. That's what you see here, is the OpenID Connect provider inside of Amazon. And basically, it ends up giving you an Amazon resource name and the audience. And so this is basically like a one-time kind of setup that you would do, and then you can reuse that, and you can have different roles inside your repositories that allow the GitHub to access different resources. In this case, it's a S3 bucket, but if you wanted to deploy to, sorry about that. If you wanted to deploy to, like ECS or Elastic Container Services or Kubernetes or whatever other services that Amazon provides, you would just create different roles and associate the resources and the permission set through the role, I guess. So you sort of configure it on the AWS side, and GitHub doesn't really know anything other than it has a role and it's going to ask for a token. So once that is set up, that's the sort of creating a role for federation. I'll show you that in a second. The trust policy is the JSON information I was showing you. And then this is the part I was just talking about where you create the web identity provider and then it's kind of associate those things together. And then finally, you get to the bucket and then you add a bucket policy that allows the role to, in this case, upload objects. And you can use their, I don't know how much people have used Amazon Web Services, but they have a policy generator that makes it, excuse me, that makes it easy to generate that JSON data that we saw. And so in this case, you can, they don't have all their services supported, but as you can see, they have one for S3 buckets. So that's the one I use there. And it's kind of nice because if you don't want to have to try to figure out all the different sort of, because the JSON has to be formatted in a certain way and you have to have certain conditions and things. This is sort of like a GUI tool that basically just allows you to put whatever principal you want, the service, select the actions, and then, well, we could go to S3 bucket. Select the actions that you want, and it literally has all the actions, and then you can just pick and choose. So what I did was, I went and created the role, and I set up the identity provider, and I didn't know exactly what the S3 sync command. I knew it was going to need like list and like put, right, but I didn't know if it needed other permissions and things. So I just didn't have any, and started running the command, and then it actually told me, oh, it had an error because it couldn't list the contents, and then it had an error because it couldn't upload them, and this kind of stuff. So that way I knew I only need these certain permissions and not all the permissions, because you don't necessarily want to do that, especially from like a public kind of a repository. So yeah, anyways, that's sort of one of Amazon's tools that it's like a GUI, and then you do that, hit add statement, and it just generates the JSON for you, and then you can just paste that into the bucket policy, which I'll show you later. Come back to that. Okay, and then at one point when I was troubleshooting, I ran into some problems where, and let me know if I'm on time too, if I'm running out of time or whatever. Okay. Yeah, so this has some pretty good information on access denied errors, because that was a bunch of the errors that I had originally, even after I had it set up, so that helped me out. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to create the bucket. So go to S3. I'm just going to copy it so I don't, because we kind of got some DNS stuff set up that Joseph had set up on Google side, because we have two sites that are one deployed in Azure and one in AWS, and then we have some DNS settings to point one or the other so that we can show you the two different cloud providers. So anyways, the name of the bucket matters though in this case, because the domain name has the bucket name in it. Or you'll see that later. Okay, so yeah, I mean this is S3. I'm just going to create a new bucket. I'm going to call it whatever. In this case, it's Amazon standsadventures.com. I think I just left this as default, but you could change the region if you wanted to. And a lot of these settings, I just left as the defaults. Obviously you could come in here and change things. This one is sort of interesting because, at least for the static site, in order for it to work, it actually has to have public access. And that's okay because we're only going to let the permissions just do a list or to read from it, the bucket, not to put or to update or delete from it. So, because typically when you create a bucket, Amazon locks it down. You can't, nobody out there on the internet can get to it, just you or whoever you've configured either through IAM or set up roles or whatever. And then, so like if you wanted to have different versions of your code, you could use bucket versioning. I didn't set that up in this case, so I'm just going to leave it off. But it's basically just a way to store multiple versions of the website, I guess you could say. And then, so for the encryption, this is for server-side encryption at rest. One of the things I found out is when S3 is hosting a static website, you can't use the KMS because Amazon doesn't support that. But they do allow you to use the SSE S3, which is I think AES 256 encryption. And that way, when the objects in your bucket are at rest or whatever, nobody's accessing them. They're actually encrypted. So just try to go with as many best practices for security, especially these days, I guess. Kind of watch, huh?
Can I go any further over the thing behind it?
Oh, this?
Yeah, I think.
Is that good?
Is that better? I can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah,
So yeah, that's good. And I don't think there was any advanced setting. Oh, this is just like if you wanted to have locking, but I didn't set that up because this is pretty simple. So you create your bucket, and then after you create the bucket, that's when you can go in and look at the properties, and then add the bucket policy, which is in the permissions. But the first thing we're going to do is go down to the bottom of the properties, which is where the magic checkbox is. And so you can see that Amazon's provided this functionality where you can just basically just say, yeah, turn it on, and then all of a sudden it'll allow you to host the objects in your bucket as a website. And by default, like I said, it's public and it's not secure. It's just straight HTTP. There's no SSL or TLS on it. But you can enable that through CloudFront or other some other mechanisms inside of Amazon or at AWS. Oh, the other thing that's kind of interesting that I noticed is you can actually have sort of multiple buckets. You could have one that hosts your the actual content, but you could also create other buckets that just redirect requests from like the internet onto, like if you wanted to route some certain content from like maybe certain countries or regions or whatever, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I didn't really look into that. It's something that I thought might be kind of interesting. And so, yeah, in this case, it just wants what's the default web page or the page that's going to serve right away. And so for us, it'll be that index, and then let's give it a 404 for the error document, which is one of that. Excuse me. Those two pages are generated by MKDocs when you compile it, when you do the build. And then you can add in other redirection rules and stuff. I didn't really mess around with that, but as you can see, that's another option. Another kind of thing that's interesting about this is you can pretty much use the free tier on here. So Amazon has a free tier, and because it's a S3 bucket, and especially if you don't have if you're not moving a lot of data out of Amazon, AWS, they allow you to do that a lot cheaper. Versus, I think, or maybe it's in. So if you can put data in, but trying to get it out, they charge you more. I think it's something like that. So.
Ingress is fine. You can give me all the stuff you want.
Yeah, yeah.
egress or you're taking it out.
Right.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
The more you bring in, the more storage you're taking up, the more money you're paying.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. So, right. So that was the enabling it as a static website. And so the next thing we need to do is, we've turned off blocking of all public access. So we got to do something about that. We don't want just anybody writing their stuff, to our website and putting graffiti on it or whatever they would do. So in this case, maybe I'll try to use that tool. If this doesn't go well, I'll just copy and paste the one that I created from before. Assuming I have enough time, just let me know, I guess. Okay, so I'll just try to use the AWS Policy Generator, just so you can kind of see that. So yeah, in this case, we're creating a bucket policy. We're going to allow a certain principle. I got to look that up though. This is where the role that we created earlier. Oh, I didn't walk through that, I guess. So this is part of the setup that I had done. It's kind of like a one-time setup as well. I'll show you that real fast. So in addition to creating an identity provider, you need to have a role that's going to be used by that, so that you can also add permissions for the bucket. And so I created one that uses the trust relationship, which describes that the GitHub site is going to be allowed to do federation into AWS by assuming a role with what they call a web identity. And it's going to get a token. The AUD is for audience. It's going to get a token from the Amazon's secure token server, and then it's going to have a condition that says only repos that look like this can be allowed to assume that role and be able to do anything to our bucket. And so that's where this part of it's kind of important. So that was a setup that I had done previously before the demo. And that took me a little bit to kind of get the right information from GitHub and that kind of stuff. So that was something I didn't think I'd have time for. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so we'll go back to over here and paste in that role that I talked about that we created earlier. And in this case, it really doesn't need much to be able to write to the bucket. It just needs to be able to list the bucket contents. And to be able to put objects into it. And then here is where it needs to know like what resource we're going to enable permission for. And in this case, that's going to be that bucket we created. So I just need to get the ARN for that. Okay, and so when you hit add statement, it gives you like this thing saying, is this what you want to do? And you can see we're going to take this role we created and allow it to list the contents of the bucket and put objects into it, but only for this one bucket, but not all the buckets. And then when you generate the policy, that's where you get the bucket policy described as JSON. So we can just copy that. I'll do that in the other thing. There's one other thing we have to do, which is add the ability for everybody to be able to list the contents so that they can actually see the website. And I don't know if this thing can create multiple documents like that, so I'm just going to edit it myself. So back over here in our bucket, we just want to edit the bucket policy. As you can see, there isn't one right now by default. And then this tool sort of helps you as well, but I find that sometimes it's kind of hard to use. It'll actually do validations for you and stuff, which is kind of nice, and give you errors and warnings and things. But sort of when you're getting started out, I guess, it's kind of easier just to use the generator, and then put it in here, and then you can come in here and actually edit and add more stuff or remove stuff or whatever too. Okay, so we have one statement in there. So we're going to add another statement. And then the principal is going to be everybody. And we're going to allow them to do things. Oh, hold on. I think I need to have quotes around that. And as you can see, it sort of validates it while you're doing it. So if you have an error, then on the right, it gives you a little message saying, hey, you did something wrong there, which is helpful. Okay, and then, so the action that we want is for S3, to be able to list the bucket contents. And I think that might be it. We might have to change this again if it doesn't let us, but I believe that was all we needed for it to work. And then, of course, you need the resource. And that, in this case, that's going to be the S3 bucket that we, so you can tell it what kind of resource you want. And then we just want to put our bucket name in here. Let's see, what is it? Stands. I'll just copy it again so I don't type it wrong. Okay. So that looks like it's validated it. So now we can save this. Of course. Oh, that's right. So when you're doing some of these actions are for single objects, and some of them are for multiple. Something that I forgot about that I should have added on this here is we actually need the bucket, but also the stuff inside of it. Oh wait, that's the wrong spot. It's easy to put the code in the wrong spot in this thing. So we need to make this into an array. Oh. Okay, now we don't have any more red check marks, so hopefully this time it'll let us save it. Yay. All right, so now we have a bucket set up with permissions for the GitHub repo to write into it. And so we'll go back over here to the repo. So we've sort of talked about these two steps, and then, well, this is the either or kind of thing. And then we just granted the role the ability to write to the bucket. And let's say there was one more thing. Yeah, I had some stuff. So one of the things I found when I was doing this is that they have these two, they have actions just for like a bucket website, and I didn't really look into what that was, so I might need to add these back into it. This is what I had originally on the, before, because I actually did this before the meetup and then deleted the bucket and stuff like that, so I could show you guys all this. So now that we've got that set up, let's talk about the workflow real quick. So we created some workflows in this repo to be able to deploy to AWS and Azure. And so I'll take a look at the actual YAML file here. So a lot of this is sort of just boilerplate stuff. You could set this up to do different things. This is kind of like the default that I had just copied from somewhere else. But yeah, you can see basically we have a job to upload to the Amazon S3. It's going to use Ubuntu to run the action against. We're going to use the checkout action, and then we're going to do some, and Joseph kind of helped me with this because I'm not much of a Python programmer. Basically, it's going to build the Python code, and then, excuse me, sort of down here is where it actually takes that, the mkdocs part of it and creates the bits that are going to end up in the bucket. And then here's where we finally get to use all that stuff that we set up in AWS via the AWS actions to configure our credentials. And in this case, we don't have to have any passwords or secrets, so we just tell it, hey, assume this role, and I'm going to do it in this region. And I might have to change the region of the bucket now that I'm looking at that, but we'll see what happens. Because I think I defaulted it to US East 1 or something when I created it a few minutes ago. And then basically, this is sort of the magic, I guess, of AWS, is it's just going to take the website and upload it to the bucket, and then, and then Stan will be happy because he'll have his website and everybody can see it. And then maybe he'll make money on it, who knows? Okay. Okay, so that's sort of the workflow, the GitHub action. The bottom, okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this via pushing it off of my machine, so that you can. Oh, the site should be up right now with the original static stuff, right? We were just going to show you the site, and then because we've deployed it once, and then we were going to so for AWS, I'm going to upload it and just like add an image or something to it so you can see that it changed and actually uploaded. And then, well, I guess you'll, yeah. And then when he does his, he's just going to have one that says Azure or whatever. But
I think the AWS domain is there, but the Amazon like a custom domain isn't set up yet.
Okay, cool.
Because we nuked it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So this is basically trying to go and list the contents of our bucket, and you can see that there's nothing there yet, and so Amazon returns a 400 in this case. But it does look like we've got the endpoint set up right, because I don't know if you can see that, but there's our bucket. So kind of how it works with S3 is it gives you the bucket name in the front, and then Amazon adds all their stuff at the end of it. But yeah, that'll. So normally we wouldn't have this kind of a nice name. That was the DNS stuff that I talked about in the beginning that we kind of set up.
It looks like it might be complaining that it's in a different region.
Oh, good catch. I didn't even see that. So I am going to have to edit that. Okay. All right. So apparently it matters where your bucket's at, so we can find it. So yeah, hopefully I don't have to recreate the whole thing. I think you can just change it, but that kind of throws me off because typically you don't have a region associated with a bucket. That's why you can see it says global up here. And these are all grayed out because S3 is not specific to any region. It's just across the Amazon backbone or whatever. But so let me take a look here. See if there's a property or something we can change. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, see, yeah, it is in the east region.
It would be global if it's not defined, but maybe defined east.
Say that again, sorry?
So like, it's right now it's having an error because it's one in east, but you were saying that usually there is no declared, it's just global. Or maybe could you have like accidentally declared it as east and so it's
Yeah, when I first created the bucket, it did give me a choice, and I didn't change that, which, yeah, that kind of threw me off because, yeah, usually they call it global up there, but, and I haven't used the console. A lot of my previous experience with the AWS is using Terraform and like programmatically doing stuff, so some of these choices you don't run into, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. And it doesn't look like you can really change that in here either.
You might be able to update the DNS, which points to the new region.
What's in the wrong region here?
Oh, so no, yeah, it's okay that this bucket's over there, right? I mean, it's going to take longer or whatever, but because we're on the West Coast. But yeah, so the way that and it might be okay. I might be able to just update the action here. Let me show you real quick. So one of the parameters to that sync S3 sync command, or I mean, not that, but the part where it's doing the identity configuration, it actually has a region name. So I think I could just change that, and then when we upload it, it should be okay. But it is interesting, like you pointed out, Joseph, though, that it actually has. Oh, okay. This might be a sort of a remnant from when we did it originally, because originally we deployed it to US West, and now it's going to a different one. It could be that that's what's going on. I might actually have to, we might have to do something with that, but if I have time, let me just try this real fast.
I just updated the DNS to use east 1.
Oh, you have that on your side too? Okay.
Sorry?
That was in the configuration you were doing?
I updated it.
Okay.
Google the links. You might have to update the GitHub workbook to use the US keys.
Yeah. I'll just do that.
That might be easier than recreating the whole bucket, because I think you might have to recreate the whole bucket or something.
Yeah, I think you do too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is a lot easier. I'll just change that. Okay. And we might actually see it get deployed too if this works the way I think it's going to. Okay, so GitHub's now trying to upload it to, or do the build and then upload it to the bucket. So we'll see. Hopefully you guys can see that. We'll see what happens here. There we go. That way you can kind of see all the steps as they go through. Excuse me. Looks like it's still going.
I think if you refresh, it'll say.
Oh, is it done? Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, the output looks done, but oh, there it goes, the check mark. Okay, so that looked like that worked, so that's good news. Let's see what happens when we try to go back to our site now. Aha, so now we're getting access denied. So let me take a look at the bucket real fast. when I did this originally, I noticed it takes kind of a minute before the objects show up. And you'll continue to get access denied if there's no objects in the bucket. Oh, there we go. Looks like it's good. So you can see that GitHub was able to upload the contents of our, or of the output, I guess, of that MK docs build, and we end up with this this fabulous static website. And hopefully we can actually look at it. So we got access denied again.
Are these like two of the permissions you noted? The get bucket or the get website bucket?
Yeah, so yeah, let me try that. I'll add those back, or add those to it. So I had get object and list bucket. Okay. Let me try something real fast first. So when you, as you saw earlier, we enabled, we used the S3 enable static website hosting feature, and what you end up with is this endpoint, which is the actual URL versus this is sort of a front to it. Okay, so if that worked and the other one didn't, then we would have a different problem. But that, because this is trying to go to the actual bucket. Okay, so. Oh, I don't think it's, so now that because the error we're getting is access denied, forbidden, but basically access denied. And that's the bucket telling us that. So this whole, there's sort of two statements in this policy. One is for the role on the GitHub side, and then this is for everybody on the internet or whatever to, and that's why we have a principle of star, to be able to do to read it. I think it actually might need this get object here, because you have to be able to list the bucket, but then also get the objects. I don't think I have that in this. Yeah, up there. So the first part is like that's the configuration for the GitHub, and then down here is the public side of it, I guess. There we go. Okay. So we gotta allow everybody to list and the bucket and get objects. See what that does. Hey, there you go. Stan's happy he's got his website. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's not using TLS or SSL, so that's why I said it's not secure. It's just straight HTTP. So this is sort of the original version, and then if I have time, yeah, I was going to go ahead and try to do a change over here. So I've got the code, the repo checked out over here on my machine. Excuse me. And I added a couple files. So I edited the MK docs YAML file to basically add a link for the Amazon one. I should probably, should I leave your Microsoft one on there, or? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we just kind of wanted to show that you could see something being updated versus, oh yeah, look, it worked, but there's nothing changing. So yeah, another part was sort of the structure, I guess, is we got the website, the docs, and Stan has his adventures in Seattle, and then we got some images. And then I created an image, so hopefully, if everything works well, we'll be able to see that on the website. Okay. Oh. Okay. All right. Ask me later. Okay. So, all right. So that should have kicked off. If we go back to GitHub here, that should have kicked off our action again. And it looks like it did. I think we want to. Oh, so yeah. So we have two workflows, and they're kind of just both getting kicked off right now. We didn't add any conditional code to say, only run the workflow for AWS or Azure. Because we have two workflows in the action, or two actions in the GitHub workflow. That's why you kind of see two of them, or you see all these things running, I guess. One's for Azure and one's for AWS. So it looks like it might be done here. Oh yeah, I didn't even see that. Thanks. I'm like, it didn't change. Yeah. So yeah. All right, so now, hey, Stan met Jeff Bezos. He was nice. So, he was nice. All right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me. If anyone has any questions.
What's the specific service you set the workflow up in? That was just...
So that's just GitHub itself.
GitHub Actions, giving it the YAML, and that's GitHub.
Yeah, so this is sort of our repo, and they have this actions, I don't know if you haven't used it, they have this actions thing. You can create new workflows, and they have like templates and things you can use to sort of get you kickstarted.
So it looks like, yeah, it's probably simpler to set up than like going through code pipeline or something.
Yeah.
AWS side.
That we could have done that as well. Yeah, but yeah, because at one point he had an idea where he was going to do a GitHub version too, so we were going to have three. But yeah, and then so this kind of shows you the sort of almost the full cycle, I guess, of development, where you're able to code and then deploy and then go see the results, and not have to pay a bunch of money and deal with servers and maintenance and all that. I mean, you're just putting stuff into a bucket and then blammo presto, there it is.
Those actions are actually really pretty powerful. They can do a lot, right? You can throw a YAML at it and do all kinds of things. And when you're dealing with other languages, you can compile, you can deploy to test servers, you can run other tests, you can do all kinds of stuff inside the context of those actions.
Yeah, this is pretty simple. What we're
It's a
going.
big orchestrator of automation for what to do with your code after you're done coding. Right? You got to deploy it, you got to put it somewhere, you got to test it, you got to do all kinds of stuff. That's one way to orchestrate all those automation steps. This is a simple example, but what he did is he basically called an API on AWS and it pushed the code up to the bucket, right? Well, it has the power to call APIs. Well, what if I have all kinds of APIs I want to call? I mean, it's just, you can do all kinds of things inside those actions that in the old days, you had to manually, deploy software or something.
Right, stand up servers and
Automate it all, and now you can even spin up servers and in the cloud and do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But it's all automated.
Right.
You used to have to do a bunch of manual stuff.
Yeah, it's getting to be pretty easy. It's almost, there's no excuse, right, to have that full development cycle. Yeah. All right, that's it for me. So are you going to use your computer, or do you want me to? Okay.
Well, in GitHub, if you're, have public projects, all that stuff's free. You can do all that kind of stuff in public projects up there.
All right.
You just have to let them scan all your code.
Yeah, you got to look at your code. They're doing it anyway.
Yeah, right.
There's a reason why Microsoft bought it.
Just some random code snippet from your public repos and show up auto-generated. There we go. But didn't run through these slides. Obviously, you've been here for an hour, so you know what we were doing. But I just want to quick mention a couple of the other user groups that meet as part of this little intermission. We got the Spokane.net users group and the Spokane Devops users group. This talk could probably have been done at the Devops users group as well, but it's at the Python one. The building you're in, IntelliTech, sponsors all the user groups. If you're ever looking for a role as a dev or something like a dev, a software engineer, internship, get in touch. Coming here is a great way to network and get to know some of the people here. We can try and get you plugged in. We're actively hiring for many roles, looking for people with experience in a lot of different technologies. So, yeah. .NET user group is going to meet on, I believe it's the second Tuesday of the month. So the next one will be April 12th. I think the last one was Mark Michaelis, the CEO, talking about abstract base classes versus interfaces with default methods. Does that sound right, Tom? Yeah. Yeah, so that was an interesting one. And next month will be TBD. 2 months ago, we had someone show how to, I think he had Raspberry Pis running like Kubernetes, and they were all controlling LED lights. I didn't attend that one, but I think that's what it was. So some interesting stuff going on there. You're at the Python one. Next month's TBD, April 19th, actually my wife's birthday, and I usually organize these, so I probably will not be here, so we'll just kind of see if someone wants to host. Yeah, if I can wrangle someone to host all by themselves, then we'll have one next month. If not, we'll pick it up in May. And then, like I mentioned, the DevOps user group. So actually next Tuesday, March 22nd, Phil and Jenny are going to continue talking about Terraform. I think Reese mentioned it a little bit. Super powerful tool. This will be the third session. So we've done 2 so far for the last 2 months for that.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
I saw the Terraform ones, and I thought about coming to that, but I was like, it looked like it was in kind of the middle of a session. Like you guys had multiple things for it, and I didn't want to like come in midway.
Yeah.
Is that a good idea? To start at the beginning and like not come in?
I would say you want to get the most out of it, go back and watch the first 2 and then come to the third. You want to just, get something out of it, keep networking, meeting people, just show up for the third one, ask questions. Phil and Jenny are super nice. They won't bite your head off for asking questions or anything. So I'd say, obviously watching 2 meetups is like maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. So if you don't have that kind of time, I would still just show up next week if you want. And yeah, social medias and Reese. You already met him. Cool. I just want to run through that because I forgot to at the beginning. So now I'll pick back up where Reese left off. Hosting.
Show how Azure is so much better than AWS.
Yeah, well, I'm going to show how much Azure is basically the same as AWS in certain ways. So host down Azure, you kind of have 2 ways. And if this was a year ago or so, there would be like one way, at least one good way of hosting a static site on Azure, and that would be blob storage. Blob storage is basically unstructured data. So you could think of structured data as like a SQL database where you have rows and you have columns and everything's very structured. Unstructured database is just a collection of files, like if you open up your File Explorer and you're looking through your documents, or your photos directories or whatever, that's basically unstructured storage. Just there's whatever is there. It's mostly just files. And so that's what blob storage is. Very similar to an AWS S3 bucket in a lot of ways. So when I say they're similar in a lot of ways, kind of what I mean. And traditionally, that would be the way you would set up static hosting on Azure. Is you would set up this blob storage, and then you would do basically what Reese did, but in Azure land. And I'll walk you through a tutorial of doing that, but I'll actually use the command line. And then I can pop open the web browser as well too if we want to see that. You'll notice my second bullet point under blob storage has far less features than this other thing called static web apps. So Azure, for probably almost as long as it's been around, has had something called Azure App Service or Web App Service or Web App. And about a year ago or so, they announced and launched this new feature or new resource called a static web app, which was very similar to their existing web app, but for static sites. Differences are obviously it's static, so you don't have a server actually responding. You know, like if we're at a Python meetup, say you have Django or a fast API, and you want to have like server responses, you can't do that. At least without using Azure Functions, which are serverless functions. I think Amazon has something similar. Azure or AWS Lambdas, I think, would be the equivalent. Yeah. So a little quote I found about static web apps. It's like GitHub Pages on steroids. So if you use GitHub Pages before, basically a built-in way in GitHub to set up static hosting, and it's actually like really quick to set up, probably less than 5 minutes to get going from having a repo with an index.html or styles to having an actual website being hosted. And GitHub Pages has a few options. You can set up a custom domain. It has SSL, so you can use HTTPS, and people don't get a nasty warning when they visit your website that it's insecure. But beyond that, it doesn't really have that much going on. It's not really part of like a greater ecosystem or cloud platform or provider like AWS or Azure or the others that we don't mention like GCP. Tom's working with that. So really the way forward that Azure's kind of pushing, and if you go to the blob storage documentation and go to the page where it says, it talks about setting up static hosting, it'll basically say, hey, try this new thing that we have that probably costs a little bit more, but it's new and has more features. And so if you already have an existing blob storage setup that's hosting a static website, you're probably fine to stay there for now. But if you're setting up something new, I would say the way forward is going to be using the static web app. And I'll run through both of those in a minute. So Reese had a cool diagram, so I was like, I need a cool diagram. So I found this from the Azure documentation. Oh, I probably shouldn't step out of the camera. Actually very similar to, almost identical to his diagram, sans the AWS logos and with the Azure logos. So like Reese mentioned, your kind of development process, you make a code change, you create a pull request, or if you're really cool, you push straight to main or master. And then you trigger your GitHub Actions is what Reese showed. You could also have Azure Devops pipeline, which is another CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, thing. And then gears indicate stuff happening. You can use kind of what Reese mentioned, the OIDC, Open Identity something? Connect, thank you. I actually didn't know much about that until a few days ago. But or you can set up using a little bit more traditional and simpler, albeit less secure environment secrets in your GitHub repository. So you can go to like the settings tab, and you basically go into Azure, you generate a secret, and then you go into GitHub and you just paste that secret in, and then you use it in your workflow. That's what I'll be showing. I spent a little while trying to get the OIDC working and was not successful before 6 o'clock tonight, so I'm not going to show that, but it is an option. And that would be, especially as like an enterprise, probably the way you would want to go. I mean, you said this is kind of what you do, part of your job, so.
Yeah, it's pretty standard.
I'm just behind the times, I guess. No. And then you get your static content. And if you're using the Azure Static Web Apps, like I mentioned, you can hook in really nicely with Azure Functions. And so if you do have, say, one screen or one page on your static website that's maybe like a contact form or like some sort of form, any sort of form, or something that's not a form, maybe you're like showing some dynamic content that needs to talk to an API to get up-to-date information, you can just hook into Azure Functions, which again are serverless functions, which actually use a server, but just hand wave that aside. You're not paying for the server sitting there running 24/7. You're just paying for, I think it's usually like it's sub-second generally. I think it's like per micro, or maybe not nanosecond, but yeah, so incentive to write fast code. Azure demo, let's go. So, and this is all also in the same repo. Where am I going? I got some notes here. Mark would have a heart attack that I actually printed out some paper. We don't really use a lot of paper around here. In here I've got like, he's on here. He can watch the thing online. I don't have a second monitor, so I'm kind of limited. Like, what you guys see is what, so I have to go old school to get my notes up here. So I have the same repo open in Visual Studio Code or VS Code that Reese did. And what we're going to do is set up, I got to get a wide stance because I'm really tall and this thing's not adjustable, is we're going to set up the blob storage first. If you open up the README, you'll notice that I went ahead and just puked all the commands into the README that you can run one at a time. So if you're trying to follow along at home or do this after the fact, then you can go check out the commands here. The Azure documentation is probably better than what I put here. That's where a lot of it's from, but and I link to that in my stuff. So we'll pop open PowerShell, crank the text way up, because I know I have terrible eyesight. And we'll skip over this, we'll skip over that. Okay, here we go. So first thing you're going to want to do is install the Azure CLI. And that's maybe excessively large. Can you guys read that okay? Okay. Cool. The Azure CLI. I'm not going to show installing it. There's tutorials to do it. And then you also want to make sure that you're logged in. I think it's Azure Login, maybe? Oh, which I don't actually want to do that, but now I've done it, so. Oh, what have I done? Cool, now I'm logged in. I don't know if any of that, I might have to crop some stuff out of the video depending on what gets printed out to my console. Good thing this is being live streamed. Oh, this is terrible. We'll just clear that real quick. First thing we're gonna do, we're gonna create an Azure resource group. So resource group is basically just a way to manage a bunch of different resources. So in this case, it's just gonna hold some blob storage, but if you had a more traditional like Python, Django application, you would probably have a database resource, you would have your app service resource, yeah, whatever else. In this case, we're going to do AZ group for resource group, and I already named one Spug, so we'll name this one Stan and see if that works. And we'll use West US, no East US going on here. Sweet. So, and you can configure the way it prints out using like AZ configure when it creates stuff. In my case, I have it set to print out colored JSON because it was using like tabs to delineate stuff, and it was so wide that it was wrapping, it was impossible to read. But it's neither here nor there. So next thing we'll need to do is create an Azure storage account, which is basically something the blob will sit inside of. I don't know, I guess in the AWS case, you didn't really have to create a bucket and then create anything inside the bucket.
Yeah, no, you set a bucket and put stuff in it.
Yeah, in this case, the Azure storage resource can hold things other than a bucket, but we're just going to show a bucket because that's what we're about today. So we'll do Azure storage account. Feels like kind of cheating that I have some of the commands here, but again, I use Terraform a bit, so I don't really write these commands from scratch that much, but adding Terraform is like a whole nother layer around the onion, and there's a DevOps user group for that. So in this case, we'll name it stands dope static storage, because I think I already used static storage. And we will give it the account name. Wait, no, I think I'm doing this wrong. Nope, sorry, we'll give it the resource group, which I named Stan. And then also the location, which is still West US 2. And we're off to the races, I believe. And at the end, I'll kind of pop open the UI real quick and show you guys what this looks like. But actually, I guess I could do that now. So we'll go to portal.azure.com. We'll click on resource groups. And we just created Stan. And we have credits. And it seems to still be, okay, so it's created it. There's all the fun stuff. Let's refresh. Oh, did I create it in the wrong thing? No?
I think it popped up right before you.
Oh, did it?
switched over.
Oh, sweet, thank you. So there's Stan's dope static storage. And you can see it's a storage account, like I mentioned. It's in West US. In this case, it's using storage v2, and it's got, helpfully Azure pre-configures it by default with certain things turned on. Certain things cost more money. So if you're actually like setting this up for realsies, you would want to look at some of the toggles that you have. One thing that you definitely want to look at is hot versus cold storage. So hot would be people are expected to be accessing this constantly, and so Azure like basically keeps it loaded up, ready to go really quick. Cold would be it sort of probably just puts it out of memory and has to reload it into memory. So if no one accesses the website when we're all said and done, say for like an hour, or I don't know exactly how long it is, they'll kick it out of memory and you'll pay less dollars, but then when someone goes to access it for the first time in like an hour or a day, it'll take longer on that first load. And then they'll keep it in memory for a little while. And I think there's one other, there's hot, cold, and then there's something else where it's like for archiving things where you pay through the nose if you want to pull all that data, because I think it's like not expected that you will read from it very often. It's more, you can write a lot of it and you don't really pay a lot per month for it to just sit there. But then if you actually want to like start reading from it a lot of time, they get you with the monies. But I won't show that because it's not what we're doing. Cool, so we've got the storage account created. Do I want to run this? We'll do it. I'll destroy these resources afterwards, so if anything shows up. So in this case, we're going to list the keys for the storage account. If anyone's online, please don't go hack my thing before I'm done. Oh, no, that's not. Stan's, what was it, dope? Static storage? What did I do? Stan's dope. Stan's dope static storage. Oh, that's because this is Stan. Stan. Spug is the one I made before. Cool. Here we have keys to the kingdom. So again, I'm going to delete this afterwards, so you can't run up my Azure bill. But what we will use this for is to set an environment variable in our PowerShell instance. This isn't going to set it like permanently. There's other commands to do that. We'll just set it so when I exit out of this PowerShell, it'll go away. But we'll use it for the next command we're going to run. So we'll do Azure storage key equals quotes, and these, we'll just pick one. We're going to see all sorts of stuff just start popping up in this blob account. So we'll need this for, yeah, it's just, yeah. Fortunately, there wasn't like thousands of viewers online, so I think we'll be all right. Spokane's a good city, good city. So here we're going to basically do what Reese did, where you flip the toggle to say, hey, I'm going to use this as a web bucket or a web S3 thing, and so we're going to do that using the command line. So we'll do Azure Storage Blob Service Properties. I don't know if we have tab complete. Nope, I don't have it set up. Update, tell it the account name. Stands, dope, static, storage. If I was writing a script or something, I would have set like the account name and resource group to like a variable and just reuse that, but I'm not that cool. And then static website, -- cut the command off the side of the page. Well, we'll see what happens. I don't think that's going to work. Oh, maybe it did. Yeah, that didn't work. So let's see, did I do a better job in the actual thing? Here we go. So we'll steal this. And this is sort of rolling in a couple of the things Reese did in the UI into like one command in this case. So we'll do stands, dope, static storage. We'll tell it -- static website, hey, configure this thing to be a static website. It'll actually create a blob in the storage account or resource for us that's named $web, I believe, and I'll show that in a second. And similar to what Reese did, we'll configure the 404 document. In this case, it's still 404.html and the index, and we'll run that. And we'll see that it succeeded. And I'll pop open this guy. So if we refresh and click on the capabilities tab, we'll see that static website is now enabled, and we have an endpoint, and it has the index and 404. So if we open that up, we didn't put anything in it yet, makes sense. So we'll continue on. And if we were not cheating and using the Azure UI, say this was all in a script, or we just didn't have a browser installed for some reason, we could actually query the URL by using this command, stands dope static storage, so -n for name, and then we'll do -g for spug, nope, for stand, so that's the resource group. And then in this case, we will query primary endpoints.web, and that's going to return that guy, which still doesn't exist. But if you wanted to or needed to query the URL that it generates for you when you create that static site blob, then there you go. Now we'll actually add some stuff to it. In this case, I think this is what Reese did, but if not, then I'm doing it differently. I'm going to run it from the command. We'll just upload. I can tell it, hey, here's some files on my local computer. Just go put them in the $web blob, and then we'll see that we can access those. So I guess one thing worth pointing out is that we are using GitHub Actions as a sort of a CI/CD pipeline. You could also use like Jenkins, or I think GitLab might have ways to do it, or whatever other technology. But you don't have to use that, especially if you're just doing like a one-off static website, or you're just learning and want to see how it works. You can just manually upload the files and manually go into the UI or the CLI and set this stuff up, and you don't have to go through all the trouble of setting up like a GitHub workflow and all that stuff. I'd say GitHub workflows are, especially the ones we're doing today, are relatively straightforward compared to some other like CI/CD configuration stuff you'll have to do. But if you're just trying to like learn this stuff, it can definitely be like one more straw on the camel's back, if you will, before you're just like, this is so overwhelming, like I can't even get this stinking website to just work. So you definitely don't have to use GitHub Actions. It's just a nice way, especially if you're like doing this for work or something. Anywho, okay, so let's we'll do Azure Storage Blob. In this case, we'll do upload. Oh, and actually, I'm going to navigate to the folder really quick, which is, let's see, where do I put this? spug stands static site. Sweet. So we'll do AZ storage blob, and then we'll upload a batch of files, and we'll give it the path. So in this case, I will do my current directory, and then the website folder, and then I have a folder that already has the site built. So I ran mkdocs build locally before, and I can show it again in a second. But that's basically what the GitHub action was doing. It was running this mkdocs command to build our static site, and then we were copying those in GitHub Actions. We were copying them from GitHub to the Azure or AWS storage. And so I'm basically just doing that here. I ran the command locally to build these files, and you can see this index.html. Well, that's probably not a good example. I guess I haven't built this in a while, but we'll use it anyways. What I was going to say is that we could see that the HTML files have the same content that was in our Markdown files, but I'll show that in a second. So in this case, $web, like I mentioned, and I'll actually use single quotes so it doesn't try and do like interpolation or substitution.
Extra C in there. No.
So, thank you, sir. Cool. So you can see we got 40 files that it's uploading. mkdocs has a not crazy amount, especially in like today's JavaScript heavy world, but it does have some JavaScript stuff that it kind of bundles. The material theme that we're using is probably adding on to that as well. So now, if we open this up, we should see stuff. You'll notice that it looks a little bit different than Reese's did. So if we go to amazon.stansadventures.com, we'll see that this one's actually a little bit more up to date, and that's because I haven't built my local one lately. Another good reason to use a CI/CD pipeline, so you don't accidentally push something super out of date when someone else has already pushed like way updated content. But in this case, we'll do real quick, we'll activate our virtual environment, which is actually a Python related thing. Not a lot of Python going on today, but we'll activate our, you all came for like NumPy and Pandas and Django, and none of that's happening. So we'll run mkdocs build, and we'll actually, that's going to probably fail, so because we're going to cd into our website directory, and it built. And so we'll bounce up to this command and fix the URL. Let me make sure that it built to the same folder. Looks like it did. So we'll update that. Oh. So we'll update that. You didn't see anything. Now we have 45 files. Wow. So now if I refresh the, where'd it go? The Azure site, not the AWS site, we'll see that it's updated. So we have basically the same content. We don't have the AWS one because I haven't pulled latest from GitHub in a little while, but that's okay. So, and then one other thing I'll show on the blob storage side before I hop over to the static web app. And when I do the static web app, I'll use the UI because it is a little bit more fun. Is that we can configure also from the command line or from the UI a custom domain name. So in this case, we'll do AZ storage account. Nope, that's not it. Yep, that's it. Update resource group of Stan. Name of Stan's dope static storage. And then we'll just give it a custom domain, and we'll take over Amazon.com. No, I'm just kidding. That wouldn't work. We'll do, in this case, super duper domain name dot stansadventures.com. So as part of the fun of preparing for this meetup, we bought Stan's Adventures for $12 plus tax on Google Domain. Yeah, exactly. Just so you guys know, we care about you. We're out here buying domain names. Yeah. I was surprised that Stan's Adventures wasn't taken by like some Stan somewhere who was doing. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe Stanley's Adventures was taken. I don't know. Tom, what's your website called? Yeah. Ooh, right off the top of your head, you knew that. He's got some good content on there. I remember reading it. Okay, let's do that. Oh, so we'll want to add one bit on there. So it's going to fail because I haven't actually, and it's actually, I don't remember what I think it's no verify? Sick. Nope, not sick. That didn't work. I don't remember what the command is. But basically it's going to fail because I haven't actually gone into my Google Domains account and configured anything in the DNS to tell it like that it should use Azure. But if I do, let's see, what was I using? Super duper domain name. So this is Google Domains. You can see all the ridiculous amount of resource or subdomains we have set up. I was using subdomains so we could use one domain. I'm not buying like 8 domain names. I don't have that kind of money, But we bought the one domain name, and we can use the subdomain names to just kind of point it at Azure, point it at AWS, point it at GitHub, point it at whatever we want. And so in this case, we will grab this guy, I believe, and we'll save it. And Google is going to add a little period at the end. There's probably an explanation for that, but I haven't looked into it. Something to do with the way DNS works. I don't know. Here it is. So this still isn't going to work because we haven't actually set it up yet, but I'm going to hop over to the UI and do it because I don't remember let's see. Nope, that's not it. Oh, come on, work with me. Somewhere in here. I don't remember where. Let's try this again. Because I added it in Google, so it might work now. But the DNS usually takes, hey, it worked. That was fast. Usually, so I guess, and this is getting into waters that I do not know that much about, but you can configure the time to live. And so by default, it's usually an hour, which I think is, I could be way off here. I think that's basically like how often it should refresh, like DNS-wise, like tell other DNS servers, like, hey, I updated this, or hey, you should like check and see if this is different. So in this case, it's been obviously less than an hour since I changed that, but a lot of times it'll propagate a lot quicker. I think DNS has actually been the cause of some major outages in like the last couple months. Yeah, like AWS East down for like half a day or something like that. Okay, so now if we go to, what did I name that? That was a ridiculously long URL. Super duper domain name, and it might not load right away. Oh, I probably have it set up to not. Oh, this probably isn't going to work. So it doesn't have a certificate set up. Oh, okay, there we go. I'm surprised that worked. So the certificate, Azure will create automatically for you, I believe, even if you're using a custom domain name. In this case, it likely created the SSL cert for the old domain name, or the super duper domain name .azure garbage .whatever. And so in this case, Firefox is trying to warn me, saying that this certificate is valid for this other domain, but it's being used for this domain, and they don't match up. And I said, I know what I'm doing, let me do it. And so it loaded. If we look at more information, it'll probably show us actually, if we view the certificate. Yeah, so it's saying it's for like Azure URL stuff, or a whole bunch of other ones. This is getting kind of off track, but where was it? So z5webcore.com.net. So yeah, so it's for that subdomain, and that's why Firefox is complaining, but we're devs and we know what we're doing sometimes. So I think that's all I have for blob storage. We're at 7:30, so I'll only spend maybe like 10 minutes or so, and you can hold me to that, showing you guys the static web app stuff. Any questions about blob storage or anything before I through static web app? Okay. How does Devops work? I don't know. So I'm glad you didn't ask. There's some details going on. I took 2 years of Cisco networking in high school, and I don't remember the answer to that one. Anywho, okay, so let's go. So I'll actually show you, in this case we have this extension installed in VS Code. Let me show you what it's called. Oh, so many extensions. So there's a extension in beta right now, or preview, called Azure Static Web Apps, and it actually gives you a really nice UI baked into VS Code, which is my editor of choice. And so I have that installed, and I did have it installed. There we go. Oh gosh. I'm trying to zoom in and out. It's breaking everything. Come on. Come on. There's probably some Docker containers running from what I was working on earlier, just using up all of my CPU. Yep. Or memory. Cool. Okay, let's reopen it. No. Come on. Come on. Okay, there we go. So this basically gives us sort of similar to what you would see in the Azure portal if you were configuring a static web app yourself, but in this case, it just kind of dumbs it down to just static web apps you have running and just resource groups. I actually have this filtered to not show a few of the other ones. So in this case, we can see some of the resource groups. So we have Stan, we see Stan's dope storage, which is actually blob storage, so this extension isn't made to work with that. But we can bounce over to the static web app, and you see it has Lambda function support, or not Lambda, that's it. Azure function support built right in. GCP too, it's all there. But if we click plus, we'll just follow this. So Stan's static web app, I haven't used that one yet. Sure, West US. We'll do custom. It's really, it's very much like kind of built with Node or JavaScript tooling in mind. It works with other stuff, but there's not like, you can see there's no Python static frameworks here. So we'll just do custom. The location of your code, so we did, let's see, website, and I'm not sure if this wants website or, let's do website. Enter the location of your build output relative to your app's location. So in that case, it would be slash site. So it's creating a whole bunch of resources for us. Azure's making money. We're happy. All's well. If we hop over to our GitHub repo, so I connected Azure and GitHub and VS Code all together so they all have control. So from VS Code, it was able to come in here, and you see 21 seconds ago, it added this new GitHub workflow. Let's see, Calm Mushroom Hexadecimal, nice name. And so this is doing very similar to kind of what Reese showed with 2 to 3 differences. One, it's Azure, not AWS, obviously. The other is we're not using the OIDC, so we don't have a role configured in Azure or like a service account or anything like that. We just have a secret token configured. And so the Azure extension was able to just go and do this for us because we gave it permission to edit the files in this repo. It's using baked-in GitHub token, which is available in pretty much any workflow you run to do stuff with GitHub. And you can see that this is what we configured. Our app lives in a website. We're not using an API, so I'm not sure why it did that. And then should be outputting it to /site.
So it actually created the secrets and you can put the values in there for it?
Yeah. Great question. So if we look at the secrets, and you can see all the other ones that I created, we have Calm Mushroom was updated 2 minutes ago. One thing about GitHub Secrets, and you might be able to get around this using the CLI or something, but I'm not sure, is generally you can write them and you can update them and remove them, but once you've written them, you can't read them back. There might be a way around this, but at least in the UI, I don't think there's any way to actually, for me to go and read what this secret was. Like, I can update it so I can change it, but I can't actually see what it is. So just something to keep in mind. There might be a way around that, but I'm not sure. So we'll look at the actions. We'll see if it worked. I have so many of these pipelines set up. I'm not sure which one it is. Yeah, I think it's this one. It's only run once. We can see it failed. I probably typed in the wrong path. Could not detect the language from the repo. That's because it's not configured to use Python right now. Failed to find default file in app artifacts folder. So the Oryx thing is a build agent that is used by Microsoft. I was going to say GitHub, then I was going to say Azure, then I realized they're both owned by Microsoft, so it doesn't matter which one I say. I've actually tried to run it locally before because I was having pipelines fail. It's really made to be run inside of like GitHub Actions. I don't know if Devops uses it under the hood too. It might.
Uses what?
GitHub Actions uses this thing called Oryx. Oh.
Well, GitHub Actions and Azure Devops pipelines, yeah, it's all like the same code.
It's just like 2 different soups all mixed up.
Well, the stuff existed in Azure Devops first, and then when they bought it and they were working stuff, they actually stole a bunch of code and kind of built out actions.
That makes sense. I wish they would steal some of the project management code too. That would be great.
That would be really
But they haven't.
someday.
Yeah. So yeah, you can go see this build system, which automatically compiles source code into runnable artifacts. So I think it's technology agnostic. So you can see right here, it's like it can use package.json and npm run build or requirements and pip install. So I told you guys I'd only go 10 minutes, and I think I've gone 20. So this will be about the last thing I do. I'm just going to update these locations really quick. Nope, I don't think that's the right one. This is the one this is the happy path one I set up before. So we'll push those changes to GitHub. Our pipeline we're going to trigger like 60 pipelines because we have like so many different ones set up. I think you have like 2, maybe 3,000 free, GitHub Actions. I think you have 2,000 free ones a month, and I've probably used half of them. So if we run this, should run. While it's running, double check there wasn't anything else. Yeah, I think that's about it. It's probably taking a while because all the other agents are busy running the other pipelines. In this case, it's using hosted agents. So GitHub has their own like build and agents that can like run tests and build your code and stuff. You can set up self-hosted agents. Come on. Not sure why that is. Not sure why that didn't work. Let's double check that that actually created a resource. So it should have created Stan's static web app. Unless I put it in Spug. Oh, I know why it's failing. Yeah, it's because the path that I pointed it to doesn't exist because I was missing a few steps. I just want to verify this. Stan's Adventures, Stan's, I don't know, one of those should be. But the reason it's failing is because in this workflow Salmon River, I actually have a bunch of other steps that configure it so it will succeed. So I think Reese mentioned this earlier, but I'll just run through it real quick. Basically, we have a few steps that are checking out our repository locally and then building it. So it's running like pip install to install our requirements, in this case, the mkdocs. And then we're actually running the mkdocs build command, and outputting it to, well, by default, it'll output it to the site folder, I believe. And so the reason that it's failing Calm Mushroom is that we didn't set that up, and we're not committing our build artifacts to the repository. In this case, our build artifacts would be the static HTML files that we're generating. So when I generate those locally in our website folder, you can see that site is hidden from Git, and that was a choice I made because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to generally commit those types of things to your code repository. So I'll just paste these in, and then with submodules, sure. We don't really have any submodules. We'll run that one more time. Even if it fails, we'll call it good for the night. But I think that'll work. A couple things about, and I'll open up the documentation real quick while we let that build. No, too far. The internet here is spotty. That's what I'll blame it on. Where are we? What do I want to show? Concepts. So you can actually set up some pretty interesting stuff with a static web app. You can set up, like Reese mentioned in the S3, you can set up like rules using JSON. So you can have paths where only certain people can access it who are authenticated. You can have paths where everyone can access it. By default, when you use Azure Static Web App, you have access to a myriad of different authentication providers. So you can use, just by default, you can log in using GitHub, Azure AD, let's see, Facebook, I think, Google. So you can use all those different things where people have to log into that provider to be able to access certain pages in your website. And you can configure how all that works. I think you can even create custom roles. So by default, there's only two baked in. There's like everyone and there's authenticated, but I believe you can create custom ones. You can set up so I mentioned this and I won't show it, but maybe next time, is you can set it up really well to work with Azure Functions. Yeah, let's see if this worked. Oh, sad day. Come on. Oh, it's still running. Maybe that's a good sign.
Doesn't fail
Oh, look at that. Oh, it's gone. Look at that little smiley face. It's great. So calm mushroom will hopefully load. Maybe. Ooh, stand static site. Oh, we're there. Okay, cool. So thank you, Bao. Yeah, I think that's about it. GitHub Actions, Markdocs, AWS, Azure, all the buzzwords. Yeah. Didn't get to GitHub pages. It's super easy to set up. So honestly, if you wanted to set up a static site yourself and you're already using GitHub, that's probably the easiest way. And if anyone wants, I can show them after if they want to stick around for a few minutes, but we'll call it good there. I think that's everything. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. I know we have a lot of newcomers, so it's always fun to have you guys here. Thanks to Reese for kicking butt at the AWS stuff. And if anyone is interested or knows someone who's interested in hosting next month, it can be literally anything. As you saw tonight, it doesn't even really have to be that much Python. In this case, we used a Python framework. Was about the extent of, I don't think I wrote a single line of Python all night. So that being said, if you're open to hosting, get in touch, talk to me, and we can figure that out. There'll definitely be Intelitech people here who can help you set stuff up and organize, or even if you wanted to do it somewhere else, whatever, we can figure it out. But cool, thanks everyone. Future. Oh, in the future we'll probably try and do web apps and APIs. So how you would actually set up Django to run in the cloud. So that would be a little bit more complicated than just a static website. And thank you for coming. It's a bunch of stands.
So at the end of the day, let's say you're making a blog or just something like a simple static page.
Yeah.
Are you gonna lean on Team Blob or Team Bucket?
Team Blob or Team Bucket? That's a good question. So in general, I would say this. If you're part of a company, cough, Intelitech, who gives you free Azure credentials or credits and stuff, or you're already in the Microsoft ecosystem, go Azure. If you're anyone else, most likely AWS or something else. AWS is the most popular, with Azure, I think, a second, and GCP somewhere in the distant. Oracle thinks they're in first. No one even knows that they have a cloud provider. People in the comments are going to be angry. So yeah, to answer your question, I would honestly, if you're just trying to get a simple website set up, I would go neither and go GitHub pages or something else that we didn't mention. Popular things include Vercel is really popular if you're doing static site generation, especially in the JavaScript world, though I think they support Python. Heroku. Hey, it's me. I don't know. Any other recommendations from the crowd? I mean, you could just set up a web server yourself too. You could get if you want to do it on the cloud, you could get a DigitalOcean droplet or something for $5 a month, and you could just set up a web server to run on there. It just depends where you want to be on the. Yeah, you're simple question, and here's all the. Yeah. You could go PaaS, IaaS, what's the other one? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, containers as a service, security as a service, everything as a service. Cool. Can you click stop recording on OBS?
Really, it's whatever's going to be cheapest.
Yeah, that's
for you as an individual.
Yeah. I would say if you're just doing it for fun,